Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be focusing on writing equations and solving variation word problems. We're going to show that mastery in class by scoring at least an 80% on the exit ticket. Hopefully you have the notes in front of you. If you don't, take out a fresh sheet of paper and we'll get you a new copy tomorrow. Now, when it comes to word problems, the thing we have to keep in mind, first of all, in a direct variation, as x increases, y increases. Or the opposite, as x decreases, y decreases. In an inverse variation, think of the word inverse. Inverse means to do the opposite. So as x increases, y decreases. Or vice versa. If x is going to decrease, then y is going to increase. Now, just some little notes at the bottom to remind you. A direct variation, we divide to find the constant. K is equal to y divided by x. Where in an inverse variation, we multiply to find the constant. K is equal to x times y. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind when it comes to word problems. To figure out what is x and what is y is going to be your front type, and x is going to be the second type in the problem. And I'll show you some examples so you know what that means. But it's important to remember that y comes first in the problem and x will come second. Now, as a quick review, we want to look at example 1, determine whether the relationships are direct or inverse, then write an equation. So I would always start with inverse. If I do 3 times negative 2, I get negative 6. But then if I do 6 times negative 4, I get negative 24. Already, that tells me it's not an inverse variation. So, if I go through and I do the direct variation, y over x gives me negative 2 over 3. Negative 4 over 6 still gives me negative 2 over 3. Negative 6 over 9 still gives me negative 2 over 3. And negative 8 over 12 still gives me negative 2 over 3. All my answers are the same, so that means my k, my constant, is negative 2/3. Since it's a direct variation, my equation is y equals kx. So my equation here is going to be y equals negative 2/3 x. If we look at example 2, again, we want to decide if it's a direct or an inverse variation. I'm going to start with inverse, and I choose to keep starting with inverse because it's easier to multiply than divide, in my opinion. If you want to start with direct, you can start with direct. It doesn't matter. You'll end up with the same answer in the end. Here, negative 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. Negative 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. Negative 18, and it should be positive, times negative 1 is positive 18. And 6 times 3 is positive 18. Since all of those are exactly the same, that means that's my constant, my k, because they're all what we multiplied. And since we multiplied, it's an inverse variation. Inverse equation is y equals k divided by x. So in this case, y is going to equal 18 over x. Now, if we look at our word problems, the nice thing about the word problems is it will tell you whether it's a direct or inverse variation. So you won't have to guess, but you have to be able to identify what's y and what's x, whether it gives you the variables x and y or whether it gives you different letters. So if we look at example 3, the number of pencils sold varies directly as the cost. If 15 pencils cost 45 cents, find the cost of 7 pencils. So if we look, first of all, I'm going to box the word directly. That tells me my k needs to equal y divided by x. Well, now we need to figure out what y is and what x is. The thing to keep in mind, y is first and x is second. Every time. It doesn't matter if it's a direct or an inverse. So my number of pencils is going to be my y. We're going to look after the word directly, and the cost is x. So in this case, instead of y over x, it's going to become p for pencils over c for cost. So now we want to set this up. If I have number of pencils is my y and cost is my x, that means my first point is 0.45, comma 15. And I need to find the cost, which is my x or my c, of 7 pencils. Now we're still going to solve this the same way we solved them the last couple days. Because we're doing direct variation, we're going to set up a proportion. I have 15 over 0.45 equals 7 over x. You would cross multiply and then divide. So you're going to get x is equal to 21 cents. And make sure your answer makes sense to the problem. 7 pencils should not cost more than 15 pencils. If we look at example 4, in an electric circuit C, the current varies inversely as the resistance R. The current is 40 amps when the resistance is 12 ohms. Find the current when the resistance is 20 ohms. So again, first things first, I want to box my keyword. And in this case, it's inversely. So that tells me K equals X times Y. Now, even though it's inverse, Y still comes first in the problem. So my current is Y and my resistance is X. So instead of X times Y, we're going to say K is equal to R times C, resistance times currents. So now let's look at our points. We have a current of 40 amps, which is Y, and we have a resistance of 12 ohms, which is X. We need to find the current, which is a second Y, when the resistance is 20 ohms. So now if I write my points out, I have 12 ohms for my resistance because that's my X, and I have 40 amps for my current. I need to find the current, which is my Y value, when the resistance is 20 ohms. So again, we're just setting up points based on the X and Y, and then we're going to solve them the same way we've been solving them. Since it's an inverse, we're going to multiply. So I have 12 times 40 equals 20 times Y. From here, you would multiply and then divide. So in this case, Y is going to equal 24 amps because it is talking about my current. And keep in mind, if I have a resistance of 12 ohms and I'm going up to 20 ohms, my amps should be higher. Except we're doing inverse variation, so it's going to be the opposite. As one gets bigger, the other one is going to get smaller. So you have to think about what type of problem you are doing. I'm going to put a note at the top just as a reminder as you go to look at these. Y is first, X is second. So now the distance needed to stop a car varies directly as the square of its speed. It requires 120 meters to stop a car at 70 kilometers per hour. What distance is required to stop a car at 80 kilometers? So first of all, I'm going to box my keyword directly. That tells me K is equal to Y over X. Well, now I need to figure out what Y and X are. In this case, the distance is my Y, and the square of its speed is my X. So now if I look, it requires 120 meters. Well, that's my Y to stop a car at 70 kilometers per hour. That's my X. What distance? Well, distance is Y, and we need to stop a car at 80 kilometers. So now if I make my 2 points, I have 70 kilometers, which is my speed, with 120 meters. And then I have a distance, so that's my Y that I'm searching for, at 80 kilometers. Since it is a direct variation, we need to divide. So I'm going to take Y over X, my distance over my speed, 120 over 70 is equal to Y over 80. We would cross multiply and divide. You should get Y is equal to 960 over 7, which, and I know we like to keep fractions in algebra, but we're talking about distance. You don't ever see somebody say, I'm driving 960 divided by 7 meters. So in this case, we're going to say it's 137.1 meters. And if you left it as a fraction, that's okay, because it will be multiple choice, so you'll easily be able to see that they'll want it as a decimal, and it's an easy conversion. If we look at example 6, the number of hours required to do a job varies inversely as the number of people working. It takes 8 hours for 4 people to paint the inside of a house. How long would it take 5 people to do the job? So I'm going to start by boxing my keyword. It's inverse, so that tells me k equals x times y. But now we need to figure out what x and y are. In this case, the number of hours required is my y, and number of people is my x. And be careful not to just underline number, because they're both numbers, so we need to know the number of what. So then if I look, it takes 8 hours is y1 for 4 people. That's my x. Ooh, and not x2. It's the first x we're seeing, and it's paired with my first y. How long? Well, long is number of hours. Would it take 5 people to do the job? So now if we write our points, people is my x and hours is my y. So 4 people, it takes 8 hours. If we have 5 people, how many hours would it take? Inverse, we are going to multiply. So I'm going to do 4 times 8 equals 5 times y. If we solve this out, we are going to get a fraction. Y is going to equal 32 over 5. But again, think about the type of problem. We're talking about how long would it take. You don't go home and tell your parents, Mom, it took me 32 over 5 hours to do something. You would say it took approximately 6.4 hours to do something. So again, I know we like fractions in algebra, but make sure you read the problem and it makes sense to it. And again, think about the inverse. The more people you have, the less time it takes to do something. So my number of hours for 5 people should be less than my number of hours for 4 people. Please bring your notes and any questions you have to class tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you then.